Well, welcome to the InnoFrontier podcast. I'm really excited to be talking with Jaron Jones today. He's the CTO of Sweater. More than that, though, he has had the opportunity to work for a lot of different companies in various roles where the roles lead from, IC to director of QA to director of engineering, and now obviously to CTO, but with some iconic companies, like Intuit, GE Health, and then Amazon. It's just so great to have you here. And the question I like to lead off with was, what point did you get introduced to technology? Like for myself, my introduction really actually didn't come till high school because we lived in a place that just did not have very good internet. So I never really had access to it. But for you, at what point did you get really introduced to technology? And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, thank you first of all for having me. Appreciate you taking the time to talk. I really don't feel like I come from anything special, so it's kind of hard to get excited about my story, but I'll try to do my best to make it interesting. So getting started in tech happened pretty early on when I was just a kid. I remember my grandpa was a technician for Xerox back in the day, and as such had access to some of their early 8086 machines with the 8.5 inch floppy disks. Started programming basic when DOS is loaded on different disks. And doing the magical snake that would scroll on the screen and zigzag across and back and forth. I thought it was pretty cool, hot stuff. Remember going to one of the bookstores and picking up a magazine with basic programs, and then just hacking them to pieces and thinking how cool it was that I could take something somebody else created and then extend it or change it or modify it to something of my own liking. So that was really like the introduction. And then as I grew up, got into baseball cards when I was a kid, early teenager, started building database applications. And this is going to date me a little bit, but it was DBase and FoxPro. Pretty old applications. Most people probably haven't even heard of these days. Started building a baseball card collection database. Thought it was pretty cool and hot stuff for being able to do that. And then moving into high school, I was in electronics. I got a ham radio license. I've been licensed ham radio operator since I was 14. Built my own antennas and built tuners and built all kinds of things that are more analog focused. And then as I got into college, I was doing blue collar labor, working in a offset printing shop to work my way through college, and was thinking, this is hard work. It's sweaty, it's dirty. I think I'm going to go to college and study this full time and do something that doesn't require me to work my tail off so hard. So that was really the introduction into tech.
Oh, that's great. And, I saw in your experience that you started working for Exactware pretty early on.
Mm-hmm.
How did you go about getting that job? What was the interview process like? I mean, they were a completely different company back then. So
Yep.
what was that like getting your first tech job?
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. I thought this is amazing. I don't have to go to work and get dirty and greasy and covered in ink every day. I could come home, in nice clothes and not smell. And so it was one of my friends that I'd grown up with, Sam Farnsworth, who had we were neighbors, lived down the street over from each other, growing up as kids. And he called me one day and said, "Hey, I have a position I think you'd be really good for, and it's one of the teams I'm help running, and it was in the support team at Exactware." And I said, "Heck yeah, what does it pay?" And the money was like really, really good in those days. Looking back on it today, it was like pennies, but got started working with one of their original products. It was a DOS-based version of their Xactimate product, which has changed a lot over the last 20 some odd years. Seems weird to be able to say it's been 2 decades, but and I was on a specialized product that they had. I don't know if a lot of people know they used to have an accounting product that went along with their Xactimate product that would help track some of the costs of materials and time and that sort of thing for contractors that did insurance repair work. So I worked on that exact account product early on doing support, got into where I could fix data, and then just kind of weaseled my way into the dev team. So, but that was my first job.
Oh, that's great. And what was it that kind of led you to make the decision to get an MBA? You're already working in tech, you
Hmm.
love technology,
Yeah.
it's certainly something that resonates with you. What made you want to layer on the MBA on top of, the job and the skills you already had?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of a couple different things. One, I love the tech, but I also saw there was a huge gap between people who could actually coordinate between the technical folks and the business folks. And that was in 2002 when I started graduate school. And MBAs weren't quite as popular; they're just becoming popular through some of the economic downturns that were happening during that time. And I really wanted to find a way to marry I felt like I could talk the business speak pretty well and then also understand the technical. And if you know most engineers, a little difficult to communicate with. We have lunch stained on our shirts and usually just slide the pizza under the door and keep the lights off. And that's how you keep engineers happy. So I wanted to go, I was a little ambitious and thought I could do a good job of coordinating development teams and helping with the business problems that need to be solved and be able to marry the two together, in a cohesive way. I think the second one was I always saw was able to see the problems with different dev teams and see the different challenges and things. And I wanted the skills and things necessary to also go the other way and help engineers understand the business problems that need to be solved. Um, I probably have a big mouth and would always think, okay, I could solve that problem. And I feel like that would give me a little more credibility, having a graduate degree to go to town with and, help solve problems. So both on the business and the engineering side.
you know Immediately you get a job in management,
Hmm.
and when I was looking into a little bit about QCOM, it looks like you actually led a scrum team. So the evolution of agile development has come a long way, but in those kind of early 2000s is when a lot of the current
Yeah.
methodologies that we use really started to become in vogue. What was it like kind of being there, teaching those different methodologies, implementing those methodologies early on?
Yeah, I actually had a great, I guess, CTO that I worked for. His name was Fritz Gaddy at QCOM, and we worked for a guy named Terry Kramer, who's moved on to teaches at the UCLA School of Business and was a chief of staff at Vodafone for quite a while, parent company of I think Verizon. And I really learned a lot from them. Both being Terry's very good on the business side, and then Fred came from a background of some of the early, agile techniques, if you will. So things like extreme programming, test-driven development, Scrum in the sense of like stand-ups and that sort of thing. And so I really learned, we had a stand-up that we did every morning in the hallway. We purposely didn't choose a conference room, went out into the stairwell and, run around the circle. We had a very small dev team. We had a sysadmin guy, two or three developers, me that was hired to do a combination of development, a little bit of QA, and just manage the team. And that was really kind of where I got my first introduction into Agile. And I think it really resonated because I think at Exact was a heavy duty waterfall shop. And we'd have these projects that we'd work for big customers and big Fortune 500 insurance companies like State Farm. And we have these massive product requirements documents that would be hundreds of pages long. And seeing a new version of the product coming, go through 6 months or more of development, you get to the end and we'd miss on a requirement, and then it was like a big deal to go back and fix and, change the requirements or, the business need would change. And the business would be like, hey, we really have to have something different, regulatory issues, whatever the case may be. So it really resonated. I'm always trying to find ways to do things better and faster and more intelligently. Not so much to take shortcuts, but just to be more effective. Engineers like to, I wouldn't say skip corners, but they're also very lazy and like to automate. And I say the best engineers are the lazy ones. They know how to automate things and fix it so they don't have to wake up in the middle of the night to fix data or patch a piece of software. So, but it really resonated early on, and I knew that this was way better than the old waterfall variety.
Right. No, I appreciate that. And your next two roles are kind of interesting. You spent some time at GE Healthcare,
Hmm.
which would love to hear a little bit more about. But then you pivot to then become kind of director of QA. You mentioned test-driven development and a lot of those
Hmm.
things. And so for both GE Healthcare, would like to learn a little bit more about that. But then the pivot to being a director of quality and what the big differences were there, or some of the big things you worked on?
Yeah, I think so. I've always been hands-on in the tech, and I always wanted to write code and be very technical. And in those days, there weren't a lot of great automation tools. In fact, they're quite horrible, to be honest. And so I always found, well, there's the other problem where I felt like just sitting in a cubicle cranking out code in one language, like Java or C Sharp or whatever. It was in the early days of C Sharp, .NET 1.0, I think it was. But I was always excited to QA when I jumped into QA from the development role was I got to use the best tool for the job, and I had a whole toolbox of options to use. Whether it was iPerf for a performance test, or in a Linux command line, or Python, or Perl, or what have you. I loved being able to dive into different tech, different technologies, learn more about the networking, learn more about the security, learn more about the database, and it really, I guess, drove my interest in being able to pick the right tool for the right job and be able to get a variety of experience. So that's part of the reason I headed into more of a QA route. I never was really just to click buttons and push, insert things and see if that, broke something. That was more along the lines of, either automation, writing, bash scripts or what have you early on in the day, back in the day, or being very close to the technical side, being down to the device driver level, or, very low level kinds of stuff, unit testing and so forth. So yeah, that's how I first got into quality.
And obviously quality has changed a lot. Um, what have been some of the trends that you've liked that you've seen in quality since kind of that first, director level job that you've had?
I think, well, let me back up a little bit too. I moved into management again, just being probably more ambitious and, always putting my mouth in the place where it got me into trouble, just because I could always felt like I could solve the problems and like, let me at it, and try to, I could fix that, I could solve it. And so that's how I ended up, in a director role and early on, especially. And I just loved building teams and being able to be really, attract engineers to a great team and then get the heck out of the way and let them just do their magic and build great products. And so I felt like I was pretty good at that. I stayed, early on, as a leader, manager, whatever you want to call it, director, pretty early on in my career. I think um, going back to the quality aspects of the job, I think I look back on today what tools are available compared to what they were 2 decades now. I'm embarrassed to think it's been that long, but what the tools were, that long ago, they're just abysmal and horrible. So there's so many options, things, that are, trying to think of a good one. Some of the web testing frameworks and things are so much better. You can capture images and capture movies and things, failed test cases. A lot of the, things like Jest and Node and testing, web-based applications are just really, really good. And they were nowhere near, we had in unit or C++ unit back in the day, and that was it. Outside of that, it was a few Linux command tools that we used, curl commands and awk and gawk, and I had one engineer that worked for me that used make files for a lot of his automated test scripts back in the day, if you know what those are. You don't get
Oh
to
yeah.
that very often. So tools have changed quite a bit.
When I saw that you were managing, at least in 2007, around 40
Hmm.
QA, I honestly couldn't believe it. I don't know how many engineers worked on Move, but I don't know how you convinced management to let you have such a large QA team. I think that there's so many people that would kill for that kind of team. How many engineers were working? Like, what was the ratio you guys had to QA v developer?
Yeah, I don't remember, but we're probably somewhere in the neighborhood of. So Move Networks is the predecessor to Sling TV, and they did some of the original video over IP. Worked with some of the original engineers from Novell. So some really cool tech there in its day. Um, but we're probably in the neighborhood of like a 3-to-1, maybe a 4-to-1. It was a little bit more intense
Yeah.
because we had so many more technical problems to solve, and it required a lot more technical depth. When you're talking about video
Hmm.
quality and ingesting video, like they don't make tools and say, okay, how many pixels did you drop, or what was the pixelation ratio, of a poor video stream, and was the algorithm working? based on because of the CPU was too high or RAM was too low or bandwidth was, maybe it was a latency issue or drop packets. And so we had a much higher ratio than a lot of teams that I've been on over the years, just because it was a more technical product and people. It was early on. It was about the days that YouTube was getting started as well. They'd just been bought, a year or two into the acquisition from Google. And people were just getting used to online video. And when we started doing, 1080 or HD quality streaming online, it was pretty cool because I used to brag to my family I get paid to watch TV all day long, and it's kind of a fun thing. And I could actually show my grandma the product I worked on, and she's like, "Oh, I get it," And so it's fun.
Yeah, I've never had that luxury in my career to go to my grandma and tell her what I do, sadly. Um, Bummer. One day. So then talk to me a little bit about Intuit and that opportunity to join that team. Did you have to move for that opportunity? Was it here in Utah? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, so jumping back to Move Networks, the team had grown quite a bit. It was a rapid, you know, like they'd grown. I was employee like number 27 or something like that is what I remember. And we
Mm,
were probably approaching 300 employees. And then along came the 2008 downturn, and the economy just fell out. A lot of our VCs and funding had investors had come back to the company saying, "Hey, make sure you've got runway to get through this downturn. We don't know, it could be 18 months or so at least." And I think our leadership at the company at the time were like, "Yeah, oh crap, we're burning a lot of capital," and I think they laid off probably 2/3 of the company. Um,
mm.
Me and yeah, probably 200 other people, maybe more. I don't remember exactly, but I went searching, and I remember seeing a job posting at Intuit, and the only thing I knew about Intuit was they did QuickBooks. And I had worked on some QuickBooks integration type stuff, at Exactware. So I thought, oh, this sounds cool. Silicon Valley company. Let's go see what it's all about. And I remember walking into the interview, dressed up and ready to go, and seeing one of my engineers at Move Networks sitting there interviewing for the same job. And for the record, it wasn't a
No
management
way.
position. It was an engineering position, and I was like, you know what, I'm done being in leadership. It was a crazy time. Worked a lot of overtime. I just want to sit in a corner, not deal with politics, in a cubicle in the far back of the whatever office I'm in, and just write code and do my thing. And so yeah, I showed up for this interview. Where we'd gone. They took us. It was like a 4-hour ordeal. 4 different people. We went to lunch with one of the principal engineers and one of the managers, one of a bunch of other people, and so it was interesting. They called me back a couple days later and was like, "Hey, we want to offer you the job." And I thought, I beat that guy out. I must be a better engineer or whatever. And he's like, "Well, not really. We're going to hire you both." And I was like, "Oh, great." And so my boss said, "We're actually, I can't talk much about it, but there's an acquisition that we're looking at doing, and we want you involved with that." And I was like, "Yeah, oh, whatever, sounds fine." So anyway, a couple weeks passed. Right before it was early December, and my boss calls me on a Thursday. We were going into Costco shopping with my wife, and calls and says, "Hey, I need you to come in and pick up your laptop." And I was like, "Well, why? Can I wait till Monday?" And Jeffrey, my boss at Intuit, says, "Well, I actually need you to get a plane ticket too. And we're going to have you out in Mountain View first thing Monday morning. And we want you to manage a team." So I was like, "Dude, that's a bait and switch.
You're
It's not what I,
kidding.
yeah, it's not what I signed up for." And he's like, "The acquisition that we were able to hire 2 positions, and one I need a manager or leader for this new acquisition." It's a long story. We can go into it if you want, but short end of the story was we did the acquisition. A couple weeks later, I was in Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, India, helping with due diligence on the source code, and completed the acquisition and brought all the IP back home to stateside. So it was a pretty wild time, and managing a team that I was not planning on managing.
Oh my gosh. That
Yeah,
is insane, especially because you had actually wanted a job where you were just kind of,
yeah, yeah,
individual
yeah.
contributor. Let me just do
Yep,
my thing.
yep,
And then
yep.
not only are you having to manage a team, but now you're having to do all the diligence for and having, been a part of managing a team that's done diligence before in the past, that is a huge lift, it's a
Yep.
huge lift because you're not only thinking about the current state of the product, but okay, how are we going to integrate it? And there's so many unknowns. I'm sure you're not very familiar with your team's code base yet, or their capabilities. Like, how did you get up to speed, period? Like, how did that happen?
Well, it fortunately for me, it was a weird situation where the CEO of the company was based out of Seattle, and their engineering team was overseas, in KL, in the Petronas Towers, the big tall ones you see in a lot of movies. Interestingly enough, they had defrauded some of their investors and were headed to federal prison, essentially. And it turns out
Oh
the
my
IP,
gosh.
it was a fire sale for the IP, and Intuit's like, hey, this is a small business CRM solution that we're interested in. It was getting some good traction. It probably would have been a very successful company had not the CEO and CFO taken a left turn somewhere. So the benefit was is I was in the same boat as pretty much everybody else that was working on the project, and as such, the investors were doing a fire sale of the IP, just trying to recover whatever losses, their whatever investment money they could. And so, as such, we were not able to talk to the company directly. We had to go hire a third party, and it was going into bankruptcy and all a bunch of
Hmm.
crazy, weird stuff. And we were all kind of at a disadvantage given that we had to ask questions through this third party consultancy firm that we'd hired out of Chennai, India. And then they would ask all the questions. And a lot of this was so that we couldn't influence or have an advantage over knowing more about the company than the next person bidding on the IP. The short end of the story is we got it, went over there to Chennai, spent 2 weeks, first time in India, just going top to bottom through all the source code and, kind of seeing what they had. Was there actually something there? Was there a product? Turns out there was, and yeah, we closed the deal while we were there. And on the way back to the States, we stopped in KIL and met all the engineers that we now had brought into under the Intuit fold, and made them part of the team, and took it over. So pretty wild experience overall.
Yeah, to say the least. That is really wild. Working overseas and over in Asia, it can be a lot, especially when you're managing a team and you're trying to find the balance between time zones and all of that. How often would you need to travel post acquisition? So the acquisition happens, you go to Kuala Lumpur, you meet the team, then you come home. What was the international component travel, or did you just have other members of your team do it? Like, how did you manage that process with trying to bring these two teams together?
It's kind of a short story. Ultimately, it was like 6 months later, Intuit decided to ice the project, and part of that was like some of the leftovers of the great financial crisis, and some of it was just Intuit trying to in the group that I was in within Intuit, just trying to double down on some of their core products and so forth. But I think it's one of those things where, yeah, it's very challenging trying to manage a team overseas. You got major cultural differences. And so I think what really, really helped me understand a couple things. Well, let me back up. There would be times when we're on the phone, probably 3, 4, 5, 6 months straight. Every night at midnight, we had teams in Chennai, which is a couple hours, different from KL in Malaysia, which I think Malaysia was like 16 hours ahead, and then Chennai was like
Hmm.
10 or 12 hours ahead. And they're also on a half time zone, so there was like 10 and a half hours, so that really makes things a little interesting. Trying to calculate meetings, but I was always like, all right, I'm sick of being on the phone every night at midnight. It's y'all's turn to get on the phone at like 8 o'clock my time, and being kind of the jerk that I was like my family is important and I need sleep and all those kinds of things. And it wasn't until I actually gone over to India, especially some of the contract houses that we're using, and realized like what life was like, and realized how difficult it was for some of them. They didn't have computers or internet, or sometimes they didn't have reliable power, in their homes. And I was like, oh man, I'm such a jerk for like thinking this way, and taking so much for granted, and thinking, it's just for my own convenience. And realizing, as we took a tour of one of the campuses that we were at, there was an actual dormitory that one of the big wigs at this company, save the name to protect the innocent, but we walk in and he's like, here's a dormitory where some of our employees can sleep and spend the night if they have to stay up late at night to jump on calls. And I was like, oh wow. So he walks in, turns the light on, like floodlights, and there's people in there sleeping because they had been on the phone all night long, and then
Oh, you're kidding.
couldn't go home. And I was like, dude, turn the lights off. The poor guys in there just passed out, and it wasn't, and then seeing what traveling to and from an office is like over there in Chennai, taking an hour, I think it was, from our hotel to the office. I, so the reason I mention all this is it just helped me gain a lot of empathy for for people of different cultures, B, people of different backgrounds and experiences, and help me understand, like, okay, what is it I need to do to build a successful team? So my job in the end is to build a successful product that is shipped and built well, that's on time, under budget, those kinds of things. And so, in my humble opinion, it's really about what does it take to get to know that team, whether they're based out of Lehigh, Utah, up the street from me, or halfway around the world in India, or somewhere else for that matter, and understanding, okay, who are these people? What are their backgrounds? What are their experiences? And then what are their strengths? And it's really hard to get to know that or be able to evaluate that over, video conferencing. And in those days, Zoom wasn't a thing. So it was like we had a video conferencing system at the office, but it wasn't convenient at night. All I had was like a dial-in number, for conference calls, and you miss a lot of nonverbal, communication cues and things. So it made it really tough, and it was almost virtually essential to have a successful team to go over there and spend time. So I went over twice in the 6 months that I ran the project. Um, and it was a balance of, like, I probably could have gone more, but it was a balance between budget for the project I was on, a balance between family and commitments. Because when you go to India, it's not like you go for a weekend and come back in a couple of days. It's at least a week, because there's a day or two on either side of the trip. So anyway, long story short is I think you've got to build empathy for the people that you're working with. You got to get to know them. You got to get beyond the nonverbal communication cues and pick up on those things. Sometimes that's even hard to do over Zoom, and you got to be there in person and take them out. Go buy them lunch, go buy them dinner, go do an activity, just get to know people. And boy, you'd be surprised at how much better a team will function and operate after you break some of those barriers down.
I think great advice generally for any team is to understand them. But for the most part, most developers will have some sort of experience with outsourcing, whether it's a company outsourcing or whether they're contracting outsourcing. And that price experience that you have of being there with the people in where they live, it does create that empathy. And, you kind of have to pay a price for that empathy, because you have to, you have to travel there. You have to be there so much, because you're right. You just can't get it over Zoom or over Skype. Yet once you have it, I do think that it makes you a much better leader. We managed teams out of Nepal for our last company for, years and years. And it would always remind me, like, oh man, not only do a lot of these people have to do their normal job, which is a difficult job, but then they have to deal with the difficult environment that sometimes, like you mentioned with having to stay at the office or something, or the atypical hours. I just think that's really powerful. And then you kind of bring that back to here. We also have different challenges wherever we may live, and it's impossible to know somebody's total situation. But if you can try and meet somebody where they're at, you will be a better manager, because you'll have that empathy.
Yeah, and I think too, one of the things with, I was just gonna say, one of the things with the MBA, a lot of CFOs or CEOs just see hey, a software engineer costs me a third of what it does in the US, or whatever the price is, right? And the thing I think I also learned early on in my career, having those teams overseas in different places, was that, and I had teams in all over the world too at GE, that there is a cost associated with, it's not just about the dollar an hour that the dollars per hour an engineer charges. There's a cost on the team. There's a cost on lost productivity because of communication. There's latency in the communication. There's cost associated with your employees are staying up late at night to make the, scrum or stand up, whatever you want to call it. So there's other costs that I don't think a lot of CFOs see, that aren't on a balance sheet somewhere. But there's things that cost you money, and there's are all things that, coming from my cost accounting classes in grad school, and even in my undergraduate, helping people understand that and say, hey, it's not just about dollars in the end. There's a lot more. It's a lot more complex equation. when you talk about productivity and so forth. So I think that's important to call out.
Oh, that is definitely. You had such an exciting time into it. Uh, why did you leave? I mean, it certainly provided all the, probably the action pack that you could hope for out of a career, but you did leave. What was kind of the reasons for those?
Yeah, good question. Fast forward a couple of years, some of the leadership at Intuit had changed. Intuit had acquired a bunch of different companies, and we just some of the change in leadership. They were wanting to shut down. They didn't want to have as many offices. Try to contain their costs more. So ultimately, that meant the Utah office. We're in the Oval War Perfect campus in Canyon Park in Orem, and they ultimately decided to shut that office down. And so me and my boss that I referenced earlier, Jeffrey, they kept some of the engineers and offered them the ability to work remote. But they told me and Jeffrey, like, well, you guys are managers, can't really work remote, and we love you. We'd love for you to come to the Bay Area. We'll find a position here at headquarters in Mountain View. And I thought, well, I was up for the journey and for the excitement of, yeah, let's go to Silicon Valley, and this is the mecca of tech. And I came home and told my wife, and she's like, we are not moving to the Bay Area. You have kids in school, you've got yada yada yada, family, da da da. And I was like, oh, come on, and turned down a lot of stock, a lot of options, and so forth. The money was good, and probably adjusting for the Bay Area, probably definitely would have taken a hit financially, but she wasn't very supportive of the idea. So long story short, I was like, well, time to start looking. And ended up ultimately saying thank you, but no thanks, and said I'll take my chances here in Utah. So and it was the right decision. So it would have been a big, my boss Jeffrey ended up taking the gig and moved out to had an hour commute at least, one way, so 2 hours a day of commuting, an 8 or 9 hour day in the
Wow.
office, sometimes longer. And I was like, yeah, I'm glad I didn't take that. It was, yeah, for young kids, not a great option.
No.
So it worked
Yeah.
out for the better.
No, no, it totally makes sense. And so Simplifile and Access Data kind of, you spent some good time at those companies. Tell
Hmm.
us a little bit about those companies and any of the other interesting things you're out to there. And man, you just have too much experience. It's almost impossible to get through it all here. But yeah, just anything you'd have to share about those experiences.
Yeah, I think without going too much into the weeds, I think Simplify, I went there for about a year, and it was just an interesting company because they were a cash cow making good money. They had a lot of revenue, and things were growing, and I just had a lot higher ambitions. I like, this product could be so much more. And it was like one of the only people that were doing online digital, what do you call it, recordings, county recorders. So when you buy a piece of property and you need all the documents, recorded, with the county, they had all the software that do that electronically, and were some of the first people to do it. And they were, building a moat that was a mile wide, and doing a great job of it. So it was a great business. Problem is they were using like old plugins, Java. What's the old Java that used to run in the browser? Totally escapes me right now, but and that was going away. And I was like, there's so many options to make this product even better. And I think they were a little comfortable in where they were without trying to dog on the company too much. But it was just like, I couldn't stand it. I wanted to do more and go faster and be more innovative. And ended up at the company Access Data. They were like a startup that had been a startup for 20 years and had gone from,
Hmm.
I say that a little tongue in cheek, but they're no longer in existence. They've been split 3 or 4 different ways and bought up by private equity groups and so forth. But I went and really got neck deep in managing a lot of different remote teams across the country. Back in New York, I had a big team down in Texas, Houston. And really, it was interesting because I managed both sides of the equation. I had developers that worked for me and QA. And so it was interesting, sitting in meetings where you have, it's QA's fault, it's dev's fault, and I'm in a position where I could be like, y'all figure it out, because, I'm not going to put up with that crap. Um, and I've been on both sides of the ball before, and so I know all the tricks of the trade, so to speak. And it was really funny because I could get, into code if I needed to, or I could understand where QA people were kind of just, trying to be the proverbial gatekeeper, because the developers were ticking them off and so forth. But it was a fun time because I could be the referee and be like, no, like, figure it out, and put my foot down, and, anyway, make it happen. Some of the best teams I ever managed. Um, yeah, it was a good time. I'm not sure what else to say about it, but it's cool.
Yeah, no, I've definitely been in those meetings where somebody's like, "Well, it works on my machine," and
Oh
you're
yeah.
like, no." So I totally understand the tension. It's rough. So if I could think of a company that's probably the exact opposite of Simplifile, I would probably say like Vivint's Innovation Lab.
Hmm.
Um, as far as really forward thinking, um, trying new things all the time. Tell us a little bit about Vivint, and then a little bit about this lab that was kind of created within inside of Vivint, that you gotta help run.
Yeah. So I ended up leaving Access Data after it was probably 3 or 4 years. I can't remember how long it was, but it was. I mentioned earlier the team had been split up and different parts of their IP bought by different private equity groups and some or merged with other companies. They had done a bunch of layoffs, and it was getting a little. I just wasn't happy there and started looking. So I found this job at Vivint where they talked about in the job description previous skills with like RF and antennas and signal, and I was like, hey, I've done ham radio for years. This sounds really cool. Experience with IoT. I'm not quite sure it was even a thing just quite yet. Most people didn't know what it was. Anyway, I went and interviewed with the for the job, and I had the most diverse. They had canned like the previous manager and had me. I met with the manager and I think one of the VPs, Jeremy Warren, and Matt Hiring was running the group. He's moved on to, I think
Hmm.
he's working at BYU Pathways now, but he was the chief innovation officer. I interviewed with all these people and I thought, oh, there's some really smart people in this company. This is really cool. The tech is awesome. Home automation, and it's like a requirement to take it all home at night and put it in your house and test it. And all the engineers, all the QA, everybody, would walk out the door with sensors and door locks and new firmware and this and that and the other. And we're always just sending each other doorbell clips or hey, I found this bug or that bug. And I was just the tech nerd in me was just seventh heaven. My wife's like, "Are you ever gonna leave your work at home?" I'm like, "Well, it kind of is at home, or or leave your work at work." And I was like, "That's never gonna happen with this company." The tech was really awesome. It was fun. And They called it the innovation group because they previously had done a bunch of like white label OEM type of cameras and sensors, through 2 gig and whatnot. And they were wanting to go further with the product and then start making large investments in like the doorbell was one of the top secret projects at the time. And back in those days, nobody had a doorbell just yet. And so part of what we done there is we had this top secret team. It was like on the fifth floor of the building in Lehigh, and they had previously had IT teams that ran internal systems like Salesforce integrations and various email systems, all that kind of stuff, and do custom applications for the sales team and so forth. But this was like an innovation group where it was to build a new camera, build a new panel, build a new firmwares that go in radio chip modules or whatever. Um, so it was just a lot of freaking fun. I felt like every day was play day. And it was like test out the newest router and test out the newest, Wi-Fi radio, and we'd swap in, and get to play with all kinds of like, signal analyzers and scopes and, voltmeters and whatnot, and just do a lot of like if you were crazy about tech and electronics, this was like a nerd's heaven. So it was a lot of fun. Got to do a lot of cool stuff there, and I still have a lot of tech in my house still.
That's awesome. No, it is such a cool place. I love what they were doing there. We did a lot of work with Vivint in our last company, and so I got
Hmm.
periodic tours of the innovation lab under NDA, just to be able to say, hey,
Yeah,
here's what
yeah.
we're working on. And it was always really fun. And so you had a really unique opportunity to do something that a lot of people I think would love to do, but it's almost impossible to find because it's hard to um, it's hard to find these opportunities. They don't just land in your lap. There's a lot of luck involved, but you were able to join a startup and have it really take off and kind of experience the scale, especially in engineering. So, you join SoFi,
Hmm.
only a few engineers, but then it grows to like almost 200 engineers. Tell us a little bit about that journey, and specifically, what I'd love to know is what was it about SoFi that drew you to it, that made you think, this is a company that could do something special?
Yeah. Good, okay. Well, first of all, they were a San Francisco based startup. Mike Cagney, pretty well known in capital markets. Worked at Wells Fargo and got to know just how like loan tapes work and how loans are sold back and forth, and in the capital markets and so forth, and how investors see loan portfolios and that sort of things. And then his wife June was the CTO. There was a job posting in Salt Lake for this company. Things are getting reorganized at Vivint, and that was the end of my time there. And so part of it was as I need of a job. It was late fall around Christmas time. I'm like, I don't want to be searching for a job over the holidays. I just saw this job posting. It said SoFi. I'm like, who are these guys? I'd never heard of them that time. They were pretty small. So I just threw out a resume thinking, whatever, I'll probably never hear back from them. I don't know who they are. It's probably some rinky-dink company. And it was funny because, the two of the VPs, David Thompson, who's up in Helena, Montana, and one of the other, co-VPs with him on the engineering side, God, totally escapes my name, Matt. He's now a figure. Followed Mike in June. They called me and did a phone screen one day, and they were going through asking me coding questions and this and that and the other, and really, I still wasn't quite sure what the position was going to be. And then come to find out, June flew to Salt Lake, sat me down, and kind of told me what was going on. And they had opened an office in Salt Lake City up in Cottonwood Heights, in the old mill complex up there. And they were interested in opening. They wanted to get a banking license, and the way banking licenses in Utah work, there's some unique advantages with I think it's called an industrial banking charter. I don't understand all the legal whatever ramifications of that, but it was attractive to SoFi. So the original intent was they were going to open this office to have a presence in Utah and get a banking license. And that took a little while longer than anticipated. But so I ended up getting an offer. It was in a QA role. I'd been in engineering, and I was like, I don't really want to go back to QA. My time at Vivint was more of we're testing device drivers and writing code at pretty down deep. And so I was like, I don't really want to go back to just playing QA and managing teams there. But they said that I was so intrigued at how David Thompson and the team up in Helena had built this team in an agile methodology that just made so much sense to me. And it wasn't like your traditional Scrum and your sprint plannings and retrospectives and so forth. It was more of a Kanban style, build as you go, test as you go, one small feature at a time. Small PRs released into production as you go with very fast, quick, iterative testing. And this scrappy little team who took a lot of crap in Montana, usually it's not like where you think like great tech teams are formed. It was so intriguing to me when I went up there, the camaraderie they had. It was like everybody's family. The technical skill that they had, and just the genuine fun that every day you come into work. And I was like, and from day one when I went up there to interview, I was like, I was adopted into the family, if you will. I started jumping into the banter. I wasn't even an employee yet, and they're just like, oh, he's gonna fit in, just right. And so I was so intrigued that I was like, okay, I'll take the QA role. I felt like it was a little bit of a kind of a backwards momentum thing, but took the job and I loved it. They were, I think they were Series A, maybe a B. I don't remember exactly, but still pretty early on. There's about 70 people in the QA or in the engineering org, and four mobile engineers in Salt Lake, and one data guy. And so they were like, we want to hire a full team. It's a 1 hour flight between Helena, Montana, and San Francisco. It's a good place to meet in the middle. And engineers are a heck of a lot cheaper, than to hire in San Francisco, and go figure, it's a little hard to hire engineers in Helena, Montana. So I was, the kind of the first manager in Salt Lake, and started building out the office. And we were just a rowdy bunch. We were there with customer support. They had ended up building a large operations team, and they hated the engineers because we were just goof offs all the time. And then, ended up, Mike and June were like, we want to grow Salt Lake, and basically told us, go hire 100 engineers, and you have, by the end of the summer to do it. And I was like, June, it's like Memorial Day weekend. Like, are you?
Oh my
She's just
gosh.
like, just go figure it out. And so, with some of the VPs, up there in Montana, one of them moved down for the summer. We just went to town. It was just like herding cattle, or just like engineers, like just like, we did it, and it was pretty wild time. I don't suggest growing a team that fast. I think we did a great job. Looking back, I think the number of engineers that were a poor fit Probably could have counted them on one hand. They ended up
Hmm.
being let go, or kind of just pushing them out of the organization for whatever reason. But it was a fun time. I learned a lot from the original co-founders of SoFi and what it was like to build a very high velocity, fast paced Silicon Valley based startup. My dev philosophy and a lot of the things where Kanban was just kind of becoming a thing, but it was like the next evolution of Scrum or Agile development that I felt like this is where things need to go. And it was partway through my time at SoFi where some of the leadership had changed. Mike and June had moved on for various reasons. They brought in Anthony Noto, who'd come from Twitter as a COO and CFO of the NFL. Pretty smart dude. And really started building a product strategy for the company. Brought in a CTO from Expedia. I reported directly into him. And it was really just a wild time of rapid growth. Like I was being stretched to my bones, and thin, and just learning a lot and just getting to work with, somebody like Anthony and some of the best people in the business. Those are very talented teams. Um, Really taught me a lot. And I think it was at that point where I've kind of changed in some of my views of the way QA works. I'd seen so much in my career where engineers use QA as a crutch. And for the first time, a lot of the Silicon Valley teams are moving away from QA. And still to this day, um, and we're really challenging teams to own the tech. And I think David Rice came from ThoughtWorks, was one of my peers that I worked with at SoFi, and he introduced me to a book called Accelerates, and it's one of the first books about door metrics. Talking about
Hmm.
rapid, short iterations, and the best teams in the world and the most productive teams are the ones who can get code out the fastest in the smallest increments, and have the shortest downtime when there's either the ability to automatically roll code back or roll it forward quickly. And so the time an incident takes, that was a measurement, time to recovery, downtime, those sorts of things. And it just really resonated with me. And as such, moving away from some of the traditional teams of like, you've got DevOps roles and database roles and engineer roles, QA roles, and really going to like engineers need to own it. And I've kind of subscribed to that philosophy for the last several years of, it makes it really hard to say, hey, this is not my problem. I mentioned earlier, engineers are some of the laziest people in the world. At least the best engineers are. And you find that, when it breaks at 3 o'clock in the morning and engineers are getting paged, they fix things very quick. and
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't break again because they don't want to fix it on a holiday or fix it in the middle of the night. And so anyway, it's been a philosophy that's worked out really well, and um, yeah, it's kind of shaped my career for the better. So it's a good time. I learned a lot so far.
Oh man, there's so much we could go into that. We don't have
Oh, I
time.
know,
I want to
I
so
know.
bad.
And
We're
there's a
we're
lot that
we are
conflicts with
definitely,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. There's a lot that
So
conflicts with people's
I
philosophies
hate
too.
to I
So
hate to skip forward,
yeah,
but so you take a lot of that philosophy now. Now you're the CTO of Sweater, and obviously I want you to maybe talk for just a second about what Sweater is because it's so amazing. I personally am totally invested in Sweater's success. I'm really excited about it. But now you have the chance to be the leader to, you know, what so I'm kind of curious, like what are you guys doing over there at Sweater? How are you guys running your dev team? So first maybe tell a little bit about Sweater and how you got involved there,
yeah.
and then a little bit about your dev
Okay.
teams. And I just realized how loaded of a question that is, but you know
Okay.
yeah, go
Well,
for it.
I'll try to do it quickly. It's a little, I apologize if I get long-winded, but I think it's a cool story. So Jesse Randall's the main founder of the company, and I left SoFi, I had gone to Amazon thinking I'd ignored the recruiters from Amazon, 3 or 4 times, and finally I was like, maybe I'll listen to them, and it became like a challenge. I thought, okay, am I good enough to pass the muster of an Amazon interview, and can I go big tech? And I had no intention of taking the job. The next thing I know was they had an offer. There was a lot of money on the table, and it was during COVID. They were like, "We've pulled out all the stops. You can work remotely from Utah. And never ever have to move to Seattle or Denver, where my team was based out of." And I was like, "Sweet, this is like big tech. I'm going to work on some cool stuff." And I got there, and it was like it was not what I anticipated. It was just not my cup of tea. I'd been there about a year. I just my personal philosophies with how to promote engineers and how to, at Amazon, if you're not moving up, you're moving out of the org. And I had some great engineers on my team.
Mm.
I had a female engineer that was out on, she had two children, been on maternity leave, and was behind schedule quite a ways for moving up to, like the next level. And there was a lot of pressure in the org. Like you see somebody who's been in that role for 6 or 7 years, and it's like, all right, something's going on here. Move them around. I was like, this is a great engineer. She is incredibly smart and talented. And I just had a few things in our talent reviews where I could just suck all the oxygen out of the room. And I was like, yeah, I'm getting a phone call after this meeting. And I told my boss, I was like, this isn't my thing. You're either going to fire me or I'm going to quit. And so that's how I ended up not staying at Amazon very long. But back up, after I just left SoFi, I ran into Jesse Randall on LinkedIn, which is where a lot of people meet him. And he'd posted something that I recognized, and I made a comment. And next thing I know, we're kind of going back and forth. We're talking, and he's like, "Hey, I'm looking at building a team. How would you do this?" And it was very sly because it was like um, very salesman-y like, but at the same time, I was kind of naive and not thinking like he's ever going to ask me to come join him. And next thing he pops the question is like, "Hey, come join me as a co-founder." At Sweater. And I was like, whoa, I just barely went to Amazon. I met him on a Friday, starting on Amazon on Monday. Yeah, timing's not good. And my wife's going to murder me if I go to another startup because it about wrecked our marriage and family the first time, a couple times. So a lot more to get into there too. So to make make it short, I ended up offering Jesse like, I love what you're doing. Sweater is one of the first VC funds. Well, actually, it's the only VC fund that I know of that allows unaccredited investors to invest in venture capital and startups. So typically, if you think about venture capital, a lot of funds have a cap on the number of investors that can be in the fund. There's usually a high capital requirements, $250,000 or more, whatever it is. To be able to make in a first, to invest into a venture fund. And then on top of that, there's, pretty strict requirements around accreditation, meaning you have to have so much in liquid assets and net worth and all that kind of stuff. And, 99% of the population is locked out of venture capital. And so Jesse was working in venture and was kind of like irritated that this was the case and had gone through a bajillion different. I don't know the whole story. You have to get the details from him, but went the rounds and was just frustrated that because he didn't meet the accreditation requirements, but had been in venture for a while. Like, there's some great companies. I want to invest in these. And so that's really sparked his curiosity to figure out, well, how can we get around like accreditation requirements, so to speak? And so there have been some changes back in 2014 around crowdfunding, so forth. In interval funds, we're not a crowdfunding platform. I'll be clear about that. But through all these different changes, just he found a way where we could create what they call an interval fund, be registered with the SEC, and allow non-accredited investors to invest in startups. And so there's a whole bunch of things that come along with that. But so I was really intrigued at the idea. I loved what he was doing. I was very sympathetic and understanding of like the problem he was trying to solve. And I knew a lot of software engineers. They were right on the cusp of being able to be accredited, but having built a lot of good companies, some of them hadn't cashed out or couldn't meet those requirements. And so there's a huge market of opportunity, especially for tech folk, to be able to participate. So I told him, like, look, I just started Amazon. Timing's not great. I will do whatever I can on the side to help you consult, kind of just be an advisor. You don't have to pay me. I just loved what he did. And so I spent, 6 months or so. I helped him interview one of his other co-founders, helped him, pick a team and hire some of the first 2 or 3 engineers, started like framing out the architecture. And it was kind of crazy because I was helping him pitch. I think it was one of the VC firms here in Salt Lake, and I'd only known him for a couple weeks, and I was like, I think work for the guy, and I haven't, and I was having so much fun doing this on the side. Well, fast forward a little bit, they've got a team hired. I helped them hire some of my engineers from SoFi. I made some introductions there, and so forth. I get to it was August of 2021, I think it was, and I just wasn't enjoying my time at Amazon. Just there's too much slow moving bureaucracy, that kind of stuff. Where I was just like, this is not my thing, and startups where that's where my DNA is. So I called Jesse back and was like, dude, is it offer on the table? And he's like, well, you obviously hope I find a co-founder, so that's not there, but let's talk. And met with a couple of his other co-founders that they're like, yeah, let's figure this out. Next thing I know, I had an offer. Started. So that was 2 years ago, back in August. So anyway, um, yeah, that's how I got started at Sweater. It's been really interesting. The reception of people, I think, has been really, really good. I think people, some of the challenges of Sweaters, they don't realize that it's not like a crypto or an ETF or Robinhood where people are used to like, oh, I Bitcoin. It takes a freaking long time to start a company, build value, and get it to the point where it's actually worth something. And it is a grind. It is a slogfest, if you will. Any startup, knows that, or founder of a startup knows that. But we think we've been able to find some great startups and have some really cool investments in some of the companies that we have so far. And the fund's been going about not quite. It'll be 2 years in March since we were declared effective by the SEC. And yeah, we're making a little bit of a pivot. We have found, as Sweater is obviously venture backed, it takes money to build these things, and a lot of lawyers and a lot of attorneys and people familiar with how the SEC works to figure out the regulatory waters. But as we have tried to raise money for Sweater and raising venture capital so we can hire more engineers and build more product, a lot of engineers were like, well, this is really cool. But hey, do you think we could use your platform and put our fund on your platform? And oh, by the way, that's really cool. You can do unaccredited investors.
Oh,
Can you help us do that too? And so after a bunch of
oh,
those in a
wow.
row,
Hmm.
Jesse calls me up. He's like, hey, well, what would it take to make a pivot and to allow other funds on our platform? He's like, yeah, we actually build it in such a way that it's not going to be difficult. So we're actually doing that. And we're pretty excited that we have a long list of people that are pretty interested in trying to get their funds on our platform. So we're talking to a bunch of different people, some fairly well known names. I think I can't really mention at this point, but hopefully I'll have some contracts signed in the coming weeks. And be able to talk a little bit more about some of those things. But being able to host other funds on our platform, really, I think all of a sudden, investors like, now, okay, now you're talking venture scalability because, it's not just the Sweater Cashmere Fund, but now we can expose a lot more capital and people, in our ecosystem and community. Plus, these other funds have big communities as well, and they can bring those communities to the Sweater platform. And so I think it will make an opportunity for everybody to have a lot more exposure to a lot more deals, a lot more opportunity to invest in startups. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty exciting. What we've got coming.
Oh, that's way exciting. Out of curiosity, so if a fund is hosted on the platform, would you be able to, as an investor, as a single person, potentially, would they be able to offer you to invest in one of their funds through the platform?
Yeah, so we've got different capabilities that we're looking at building. Some of it would be investors that are like, hey, we want to bring our own community and we want to keep it kind of locked down for just our
Right.
community of people. And there's some pretty interesting names in that pool that you'd probably recognize. There's also other people that are like, hey, we have a big community. We love what Sweater's doing. You guys are starting to get a decent sized community. Can we just expose it onto your platform and we'll figure out like what the rev share kind of stuff looks like. And we're like, yeah. So I think there's a lot of opportunities on the table, and we're fleshing those out right now. We're hoping to be able to, people at one point will be able to have multiple funds that they can invest in. So for example, maybe there's a
Oh, that's so cool.
clean energy tech fund, or or a CPG kind of fund, or a lot of people we found are very passionate about different segments of industry, and very passionate about wanting to invest in, it could be a women's founders, kind of fund just for that sort of thing. So we do a lot of different themed funds and that sort of thing that people that are passionate about those different things could, invest in just those funds or multiple funds. So pretty cool stuff.
Wow. No, that is such cool stuff, man. I'm way excited about what you guys are doing. Just my last question here is, how did you
Yeah.
kind of determine the tech stack for Sweater? I mean, you guys have, you know, a lot of regulatory requirements. What was it that kind of went into that decision? Maybe just tell us a little bit about as much as you can about your early tech stack, and then, man, I just wish that we had more time.
Yeah. So it was one of the things where, coming from a heavy Java background, a lot of these I've been on Node for so long now. It's totally escaping my. Well, it's Java framework. Yeah, right. A lot of configuration, a little bit heavier lift for some of the Java frameworks out there. And we've moved. So part of that was taking into consideration limited budget, trying to stretch our dollars as far as we can and get a product out the door. And so went with Node, running Express and Apollo GraphQL on the back end and using Mongo. One of the decisions for that too is we didn't know what the data structure was going to look like, and we feel like Mongo gives a lot of flexibility. We're not doing a lot of intense math calculations, so just felt like that was a good fit. We didn't need the precision that like a Java or other strong type language gives us. And so it also is. It's a lot easier to find engineers that are versed in like a React and can and I hire one or two engineers who are really good at building APIs, and I can teach as long as I've got a senior guy who knows how to build backends and is really strong there. It's easier to teach engineers to write backend code than maybe have only previously written front end applications. And so it's pretty easy to find React engineers. So I think that was a pretty well. We're actually started as mobile only. We are soon going to launch a web version where people can invest online via the browser. And that's part of what these partner deals are wanting to. They're like, well, it's nice you have a web app or a mobile app, but a lot of our investors would rather have a web app. So part of that process was like, what would allow Sweater to move the fastest and get the most scale quickly? And that just made a lot of sense. I can stand up in ECS and running a Docker, deploy quickly, and be able to crank out code pretty rapidly and be able to hire engineers a lot easier and quicker. So that's what we went with, and it's been a good decision. I every once in a while have a venting situation like this last weekend, just trying to do something that I like learning Java. This has been so easy to do. Some would argue that TypeScript, things are a lot easier there, and it's just one of those things where there's trade-offs and there's reasons to do merits for doing either one or. But it's been a good decision, and it's allowed us to really move fast. We're doing releases multiple times a day. Everything's CI/CD. We have unit tests running, on the back end, and we have a very strict. I would say there's no like written rules, but it's more of a gentleman's agreement, a handshake agreement kind of thing, where we keep PRs very small. Nobody likes to read 4,000 lines of code in the PR. You're like, forget this, I don't have time. Approve, and whatever happens. And so we've got a really good team where we keep it small and we move fast. We use a lot of feature flags and try to get things out the door quickly, and kind of work your way up the stack. So we start at the data layer and get the models and that sort of thing in place, get your services in place, get your controllers in place. We can have those behind feature flags and so forth. When it allows us to keep I wouldn't say Trump-based development, but we're pretty close to it. Branches only live a day or two at a time, so it's kind of fun. A lot of fun, actually.
Well, we're cheering for you guys. We're super excited about the democratization of the VC process. I think that investing in private companies is going to be something that a lot of people will want access to, especially in the crazy macroeconomic environments that we're all going into.
Yeah.
I think it'll be a really cool asset class. Granted, it is locked up. It is very different. You're not going to experience that exponential over a short period of time in most cases. So, it'll be an interesting journey. But, some of the things you guys are working on are truly, they are truly innovative. They're not being done before. And so we really wish you well. And Jaron, I cannot thank you enough for coming on this, having this conversation with me. There's so much here. And so anything else that any plugs or anything that you want to give here right at the very end?
Yeah, no, I say thank you for the time and thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure. I think you mentioned having access to the asset that's really why I came to Sweater. You think about how much of the world has changed for the better through a lot of the startups over the last 10, 15 years. You think about what came out of the last economic downturn in 2008. It's really exciting. The Airbnbs, the Instagram, some very life-changing products came out of that time. So I think we've been in a downturn now, and a little bit of some would say it's a recession, others wouldn't. So however you want to label it, I think the exciting thing is the time for startups has never been better, and the time to build a company has never been better. There is capital out there, so don't let that fool you. And if you're thinking about something and you have an idea, like it's do it. And I would encourage people. It's like one of the most difficult things you'll ever do. I read an article from the founder of NVIDIA the other day saying he probably wouldn't do it again because it was that hard. But you think about what NVIDIA has done to change the world, and that's what gets me excited every day, I swear. Being able to make a difference and expose, an asset class that people have not had, the privilege of being a part of. And that's what startups are about. So I encourage anyone and everyone. It's never too late. You're never too old, never too young. There's a lot of cool stuff that people are doing, and I think 4 or 5 years from now, you'll see some very innovative companies that have come out of the last year or two. While the venture landscape's been a little dicey, so yeah, encourage people to jump in.
Well said, Jaron. Thank you so much for coming, and I can't wait to
Yeah,
talk again soon.
yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.